Hello, this is Faith of Faith and Books. I find myself with a free morning. I was supposed to watch my grandson, but my son-in-law's car broke down and it's in the shop and he couldn't get to work, so he's just staying home with the baby. So I thought I would do a quick video for anyone out there who's interested in homeschooling, just because I've been thinking about it lately. And so let me just get to write what I wanted to talk about. And this is sort of tangentially related to books because, of course, the crux of my homeschool was reading out loud. That's how I oriented everything around that. So I was thinking that there were 8 elements, and this is how, every family homeschools in their own way. You just find out what works for you, and what works for you can change from year to year, even from season to season. It can be different for each child. It's a very fluid process when you're learning at home. So looking back, there were like 8 elements that were always part of our home learning. So I consider myself kind of unschoolish, relaxed, eclectic, because curriculum and being strict and emulating a brick and mortar type school just absolutely did not work for us. So, and people get really, women especially, not to, be anti-feminist or anything, but I've just noticed that women get really, really anxious about this stuff because they really compare themselves. They have a perfection problem where if they don't do everything perfectly and if their kids aren't learning perfectly, then they just blame themselves and they compare themselves to other people and they always think the other families are doing it better. And they can really work themselves up into a real state of anxiety about the whole thing, and then they burn out. Not to say that, I struggled with this too, though I don't think nearly as much as other women, just because I'm so ADD, I just can't. That was the thing that burned me out, was just being overwhelmed by all the various tasks, all the moving parts that go on when you're with children all day long, and, just being overwhelmed by the managerial sort of organizational aspects of it. And, children are, by their very nature, immature. And when you have to hang around immature kids, and you're constantly responsible for them and you're constantly making decisions all the time, you can get kind of, that can burn you out. Anyway, but there's lots of joys, of course, that come with that make up for that. Anyway, so there's 8 elements that were essential in our homeschool, the way we wound up homeschooling. So the first element was read alouds. We had regular read alouds at certain points during the day. This was a loose routine, so it wasn't the same every single time, but this is just the general way that we did things. So early on, when I started homeschooling, I heard of this concept called pegging. And what you do is you find something, it's kind of for ADD people. You find something that you're going to do every day, and you peg some other task to it or some other thing you want to get done to it, so that you relate, in your mind, you relate the two, and so you automatically start doing the other thing too. So I knew that I was going to feed my kids breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So I would peg read alouds to that. So in the morning, we would read aloud over breakfast. I tended to eat my breakfast as I was preparing it for them, or I would be almost done. I would only need a couple of bites before I could start reading aloud, and same with lunch. So when we sat down at the table and I had everybody there, sort of as a captive audience, I would read aloud. So I tried to do that for breakfast and lunch. And if I couldn't get it done for breakfast or lunch, for whatever reason, life was being chaotic or something, I could always make up for it, at night. But I tended to not want to read aloud at the table at night just because I was tired by then. So our standard read aloud times would be over breakfast, over lunch, sometimes reading aloud picture books and stuff before quiet time, And then again before bed we would read aloud. So in the morning over breakfast I tend to want to do just because I'm a Christian, I wanted to do religion. And then so we would read maybe from the Bible, or we would read Bible stories, or we would read something that related to religion. And then often I would also want to read something related to history or some sort of content subject. So for me, the content subjects were history, science, and religion. So I would read books like, Bible history. This is a retelling of Bible stories. This one got coffee spilled on it because it was at breakfast. This is a reprint from an older book. That was one. Or I really enjoyed these books by Marigold Hunt. These were good to read around. A Life of Our Lord for children, The First Christians, The Acts of the Apostles for children. Or, I'm Catholic, so we would often read a lot of saints' biographies. And that was good because it taught both religion and history, and sometimes geography and other things. So I really like the Vision books. There's a series called the Vision books, and they had stories like this: Saint Elizabeth's 3 Crowns. So she was a queen of Hungary. Yeah. So from the Middle Ages. Here's Mother Seton and the Sisters of Charity. That would be American history. Here's another one that teaches American history as well, St. Isaac and the Indians. So stuff like that we would read aloud. And I would just read, a chapter or so a morning until we got through it. So that was usual for breakfast. And then at lunch I tended to, sometimes we were interested in a book, so we would read it again at lunch. But I tended to want to maybe do more science or something else. Maybe poetry or something like that. So I might read aloud, something from a book like this, just a chapter on a mathematician, or whatever. It was really, really flexible. As long as we were reading something of content, that was good. And then at night is when we would read literature. And often that was when my husband got involved, and he would read it out loud to the kids, or sometimes, depending on the age of the kids, he would read to the older kids, and I would take care of the younger ones, or sometimes he'd be reading to the younger ones, and I'd be reading to the older ones. It just varied over the years. We read lots of literature that way. I remember they went through a Jules Verne phase, and Harry Potter was read aloud, and Treasure Island, and all kinds of books were read aloud. So that was the crux of everything. We read aloud, and I just tried to have a variety, expose the kids to a variety of subjects that way. Then we also did copy work after breakfast. Right after breakfast, we'd clear the table, and everyone would get out their copybooks. And I'd heard about this, and I tried to implement it unsuccessfully for a few years, and it's an idea that comes from Charlotte Mason, which I mentioned before in a previous video. But my oldest son was diagnosed dysgraphic, and so he had to get special physical therapy, and he had to learn how to handwrite from a therapist. So the other kids all had sort of vestiges of the same problem. They didn't want to pick up a pencil on their own. So we decided that as a family, we were just going to do copy work. So I did it too. And we would just, it varied from year to year. Sometimes they just had a penmanship book that they would use. Sometimes we would have, a composition book, and the kids would copy over jokes or, lines that they liked in a book that we were reading. Or sometimes, it just really varied. Sometimes it varied from day to day. Sometimes it varied from year to year, or like semester to semester, because we would change things up throughout the school year as well. So, and I'm so frustrated with myself because I've been trying to organize books and stuff, and I had a collection that I had saved of the kids' copybooks, some of them, just to have something to remember. And I can't find them now. I don't know what I did with them. But I found one. This was from high school. This is my youngest son's handwriting. Here he's copying over passages from St. Mark in Latin. That was from, I think, 10th grade. So that's an example of what we did. So we would do that right after breakfast, just for 10 to 20 minutes. And so that was sort of something that we really tried to do almost every day. And I would say it wound up being more like 3 or 4 days a week. So that was the second element. So it was read alouds, just a routine of read alouds, copy work. The other thing, it depended on the mood and the grades and everything. But sometimes I would plan short lessons based on something. So, for instance, in my state, you have to show some sort of proof of progress, and you have to mail that in by, I think it was August 15th. And so you had 3 ways to do that. You could get an evaluator, you could, like a teacher, or one time I did the evaluation. You had to write up an evaluation of the child's progress over the year and send it in. So evaluation, or you could take a standardized test of some sort. And that's what we usually did. We did the evaluator when the kids weren't reading yet, because they were late readers and they didn't really learn to read till they were in their 9th year. But then once they were reading, we switched to the standardized testing, just because my husband liked to be able to show his dad the scores on the standardized test, just to sort of reassure my father-in-law that things were okay. So we would do that. And when we were studying, when we were going to take the standardized test, which usually was in the spring, I felt it was unfair to just, foist this test on the kids without some sort of test preparation. So I would get these Spectrum workbooks, test prep workbooks, and we would just sit and go through them, especially the math. And if the kids didn't know something, like how to borrow or carry or regroup or long division or something like that, then that's when I would take them the opportunity to teach them. And we would do some practice tests. It was pretty casual, I don't know, we would spend maybe 3 weeks to 6 weeks before we took the test, kind of just casually going through these prep books and seeing what we might need to know. And you know what, if the kids didn't quite get the concept, I was even okay with that, because in school kids take those tests and they don't quite have the concept. And so I didn't feel like there was, that they had to be perfect, but they always scored well. It really wasn't a problem. Anyway, so that's, so that would be a possible short lessons that we might do, or there might be a unit study that kind of grabbed me, and I'd say, hey kids, let's do this. And a couple of unit studies that we really liked were this one on American geography, are based on these books by C. Holling. These are excellent, beautifully illustrated books. So this is a really nice unit study. I remember my middle son especially loved this. He just loved it. There's some really nice pictures, yeah. So this one is Pagoo. Yeah, that's the ocean. Paddle to the sea, traveling down the rivers. Men of the Mississippi. So we really liked that unit study. Another one that I really liked, and I guess this is just for Catholic schools, but it's sort of a based on virtue program for achieving character education. This one's really fun because you pick one virtue, like loyalty. Then they give you quotes that we could use for copy work, right? So they've got quotes from Alexandra Dumas, John F. Kennedy, something from the Bible, Abraham Lincoln. And then they would, from the Book of Virtues, they'd recommend stories you could read to discuss with your kids the concept of loyalty. And then you would come up with projects you could do, and then recommended books and discussion questions, writing prompts, music you could listen to. even like science project, you know, it all tied in to the idea of loyalty. So, or whatever virtue it was. So this was a really fun one, and you can take it as far as you want. You can take a really relaxed approach to it, and it's really rich, and you get some really good discussions with your kids. So, so that was another one that we did for a while, and there were various ones. Like I know we did some history ones. We did one based on the explorers of the New World. I remember we did something on that. You know, and a lot of times we have really, really informal unit studies that just grew out of our read alouds. Okay, and then and sometimes we had short lessons and sometimes we didn't. Also, because my kids were late readers, I would sometimes have short lessons with them teaching phonics to them. And sometimes I do that in the morning, sometimes I do it in the afternoon when they were in quiet time. So quiet time was something that for many, many years was just written in stone. We always had quiet time after lunch. And that meant that the kids had to go to the rooms, and if they were little, they would nap. And if they were a little bigger, they could read, or they could listen to audiobooks, or they might be able to play games with each other if they're quiet about it, or they would just play. You know, they just play quietly in their room with their Legos or whatever. And sometimes, you know, a combination of all of those. So quiet time usually lasts, you know, at least an hour, but sometimes, you know, more often than not, a couple of hours. And I would use that time as a break time for myself, though I often had a baby or a toddler with me. But I would try to just at least lay down for a little while. All I needed was a little nap. I just need a cat nap to just sort of lose consciousness for a few minutes and then wake up. And that's, to me, that's more refreshing than having a really long nap. So I would just try to get that. And then, you know, if I was able to, I might squeeze in a shower, or I would just get up and make a cup of tea. And then sometimes, as quiet time was ending, I would pull a child out just to have one-on-one, like for reading, to teach reading, or if I felt like I needed to connect with that child, or there was a particular interest that child had and I had something that I wanted to do with them with it, you know, it was that sort of thing. And I didn't do that every day, but that was something that sort of happened. So that was quiet time. So we've got reading out loud, copy work, sometimes short lessons depending on what was needed, what was going on, quiet time. And then I tried to have tidy up times. So that would be just a few minutes, maybe in the morning and in the afternoon or evening, where I would put on a timer and I would just make everybody run around and tidy up. And like the older kids, like my oldest daughter was really good at like clearing surfaces and tidying up surfaces. So that was sort of her job. She would go around the coffee table, the kitchen table, you know, that sort of thing, counters. And then the other kids, like my oldest son was really good at loading the dishwasher. So he might do that. And then the younger kids, I would sort of make runners for me, because things, you know, toys had been pulled out and books had been pulled out and, you know, coats were lying around, all that stuff. So I would, you know, have them be my runner, and I would just say, okay, somebody go hang this coat up, or okay, go put the shoes all the way over there, or go put this book back in the bookcase, or whatever. And they would just run back and forth. And we have a timer on. We try to go real fast, get as much done as we could before the timer went off. And that was sort of something that I did just to sort of hold the chaos at bay a little bit. It was like a little hole, a finger in the dike kind of thing, because I wasn't the best housekeeper and we were more often a mess than not. So tidy up times. And then screen time was allowed. I was always fighting screen time because I didn't want them sitting in front of screens too much. But screen time was also an opportunity to learn. So they would, you know, I mentioned before, Magic School Bus. What was that one? Ruffman. And there were a couple of really good kids shows that came out of Boston PBS that were really good, that the kids really liked. Things like Reading Rainbow and Cyber Chase, and there were just a bunch of really good educational shows that the kids like to watch. So that, I included that in education. And also they would play computer games, and sometimes the computer games would also be educational. Like, I mean, Freddy Fish or Pajama Sam, it's all problem solving. They learned a lot of math from Math Blasters. And my oldest son was really into I'm dating myself because these are older things, right? But Age of Empires and Age of Mythology. He got really into mythology and reading about history because of the Age of Empires. So that kind of thing. I have one son who learned about percentages from playing Mario. Like, he figured out what percentages were. So those games, they were sort of a mixed bag. You shouldn't do too much of them, but they did have some benefit. So I consider them just part of the whole, landscape of learning. So there'd be screen time, and then there was always an outside obligation, as I tried to always set up something that would be physical, because we're natural couch potatoes, so we needed a reason to get out. So I was always signing them up for things like our homeschool co-op always did tennis lessons in the spring and fall. I'd sign them up for that, sign them up for homeschool gym classes or classes that were being held at a local, sports gym kind of place. Or they would have we went through periods where the weather was nice. There'd be a meetup at a playground and you could go play. There'd always be a pickup kickball game, or the kids would just be chasing each other around, climbing on the swings and the jungle gyms and that sort of thing. So and other things too, like they'd take art lessons or music lessons, or we'd just have to run errands, or once a week I would try to go to mass. That would usually be at noon. Because I couldn't really manage the daily mass, but I would try to do one weekday mass. So we used to try to do that. So there were just outside obligations. And also when the kids got to be about 7th grade or so, we would use a math tutor to get more formal with math. And I am not good at math, and I'm not good at teaching higher math. So we would hire a math tutor. And so often she would come in the afternoon, so that would be sort of an outside obligation. Or when the kids got into high school, they were taking classes at co-ops and at the community college, so that would also be an outside obligation. Or any online class that they might be taking. So there was always some sort of outside thing, and you have doctor's appointments and things like that. And then the last thing was something I call strewing. This is really long. Wow, I'm so sorry. But strewing is when you just put things around your home that your kids might pick up and learn from. So books you might get out of the library. I used to belong to Enchanted Learning, and I would print out worksheets from that. I would just set them on the table, just occasionally, and the kids would find them and like them. Or we had a basket of just sort of workbooks that I would get from Barnes & Noble or Target or something. And, dot to dots or mazes or summer review workbooks and that sort of thing. And when the kids were in the mood, they would pick them up and work in them. Or Sudoku puzzles, that was really popular for a while. And then I would also post things that, like I was saying in the other video, with the one resource that I use for spelling, I would type up spelling patterns or spelling rules on a piece of paper, and I would just put it on the fridge, or I'd stick it on the wall, and at some point during the week we would talk about it, especially if we were doing copy work and we noticed that whatever word we were writing in the copy work was also in the pattern or the rule that I had posted. So the kids would make connections that way. So that was part of strewing. We have a globe that we would look things up whenever we had a question about geography. I put up maps. We had a map, shower curtain. I got this big timeline poster that I put up in the hall, you know, so that you could look at that if you wanted to look at a timeline. Just stuff like that. Just strewing, just putting things around the house. That we had that math station that I talked about, scale where the kids could come and weigh things when they felt like it. So that was the other thing. So I hear my son walking around outside this room. Anyway, this is too long. I'm so sorry about making everything so long. So I'm going to end there. Those are my 8 elements, okay? Reading aloud, copy work, possible other short lessons, quiet time, tidy up times, screen time, outside obligations, and strewing. And those were the main 8 elements of my homeschool. So I hope you found this helpful. Talk to you later. Bye.